Convicted killer and star of the Serial podcast, Adnan Syed, is back in court today. His team is trying to convince a judge to grant him a retrial.
Yeah, Syed was sentenced to life in prison back in 2000 for the murder of his high school girlfriend. Crimesider's Graham Cates is here to join us with the latest to talk about this. So, Graham, let's go back for a minute. Explain to the audience who may not have seen Serial the way all three of us have and have argued over it for the last couple of weeks. What was Syed convicted of, and what is he arguing now?
Syed was convicted of killing his high school ex-girlfriend, Hae Min Lee. This was a case that was kind of covered by local media, but it didn't really come to national prominence until it was featured in the Serial podcast last year. And during this hearing this week, which is today, tomorrow, and Friday, we're going to hear from a bunch of people who were kind of featured prominently in the Serial podcast itself.
While I was listening to Serial, I was thinking to myself, how is it possible that this evidence didn't make it into not the first trial, but a second trial? They know all the mistakes. They know the missteps by the prosecution. Why wasn't Adnan's defense team able to make hay while the sun shines? Third time around, what kind of evidence are we going to hear?
First, we're going to hear from one of the main characters of Serial when you really think back to it. It's a girl named Asia McClain, who is kind of referred to over and over again through the podcast. She was a friend of Syed's. She said that she saw him in a library about when this murder was supposed to be happening. And what happened was Syed says that he told his lawyer at the time, a woman named Cristina Gutierrez, that she should talk to Asia McClain, but that never happened. And so far this morning, in the early stages of this hearing, they're focusing on Gutierrez. After Syed's trial, she was actually, she lost her law license. It had to do with a fallout from a bunch of other cases. It turns out she was sick at the time, she was having financial problems, and we heard witnesses who said that at the time she wasn't really focusing very well. But we also heard from the prosecution, and you don't really hear this often, the prosecution is saying she was a great defense lawyer. She did the best she could. It turns out that Syed was just guilty.
Yeah, well, of course the prosecution
is going to say that. Yeah, exactly. I wonder, as journalists, we listen to something like this, and it's what you all aspire to. We all aspire to finding what's the word?
Irregularity.
Yes, in a case, and presenting that to people, and then people saying, wait a second, there may have been a miscarriage of justice here. Did the Serial podcast help Adnan's cause?
There's no doubt about it. So much of what's happening at this hearing, and this is to consider whether or not he should get a new trial, is evidence that was presented in the podcast. So we're not just hearing from Asia McClain. We're going to hear from cell phone experts who are going to say one of the key parts of the state's case against him was this record that showed that he had been making calls from near the scene of the crime. His lawyer is going to say they actually didn't include a cover sheet that said that this isn't reliable data. You can't use this during your trial. And the prosecution's going to call their own cell phone expert who's going to presumably say that's not true.
The interesting thing about, we're talking about Serial now, but now Making a Murderer on Netflix is making the rounds. And again, it's documentary producers going back, looking at the evidence, trying to figure out how things went wrong. When you put it out so public, the process of justice, sitting back, I'm thinking to myself, thank goodness I'm not the one who's been arrested. It's so clear how a miscarriage of justice can happen. And oh, by the way, when it comes to lawyers, you get what you pay for.
Right. The other thing is also, we should point out, though, that the victim's family in Serial, they've never cooperated with the Serial podcast. We've never heard from them. So as we talk about Adnan and perhaps that he might not be guilty in this crime, we've never heard, unlike Making a Murderer, where the victim's family is very prominent in that series, we don't hear from them. So the pain, the suffering, the things that they've gone through, the things that they know, they've never gone on the record.
Yeah, there's definitely been no indication that they've taken Serial as evidence that Adnan is not guilty. And this is also, this trial or these hearings are kind of another chance for the state to say, there are things that you don't realize, there are reasons why we still think he's guilty. And that's kind of, now we're actually getting to see this other side that maybe we didn't all get to hear in Serial.
This is not the first time his lawyers have made an appeal for a retrial. How long is this process likely to take?
It could end up, it's a legal process. It could end up taking a really long time. So let's say at the end of this, a judge rules, he gets a new trial. The Attorney General of Maryland can appeal that, and he probably will, since it was the Attorney General's decision in the first place to contest this new trial. And then that could go on for months, years. We really don't know.
Irregularities. That's the word I was trying to say. Graham Cates, thank you very much for digging into this for us. We appreciate it. Remember, you can track investigations and read up on the big crime stories of the day at cbsnews.com/Crimesider.